Well, David, thank you very much indeed for that extremely kind introduction. It's a real honour to be here. Thank you very much to David and the organisers for inviting me. And to come over from the Society of Apothecaries in London to our fellow organisation here. So greetings from London Apothecaries to Apothecaries in Ireland. And also such an honour to speak on the Feast of St. Luke. We also celebrate St. Luke for exactly the same reasons as you do. And it's a very special day in our calendar. It's also a particular pleasure to deliver the Lucas Memorial Lecture. What a remarkable man Charles Lucas was. Apothecary and physician, of course, as you know, political radical and a man of immense talent. There are many aspects of his life and what he did which probably have relevance to what I'm going to talk about, and he would be a paradigm for what's happened here in the Apothecaries, but also what's happened in London, particularly his desire to maintain standards and also to help the poor. And of course, it is a particular pleasure to come to the company of Apothecaries Hall here in Dublin. The links between the Apothecaries in Dublin and the Apothecaries in London are very strong in terms of our history and what we've done, as you will see as I go through my talk. So what I propose to do is to just do four things. I'll give you a little history of the Society of Apothecaries in London, say a little bit about some of the people who are prominent in our history, give you a virtual tour of the hall, and then say a little bit about what we do today. So, firstly, the history. Apothecaries have been around since the dawn of time, but they first started being really known as apothecaries and functioning in the way that we might recognize as apothecaries in medieval times. And a medieval apothecary's shop in London might have looked something like this. So who were these people, these very original apothecaries? Well, in London, most apothecaries belonged to a guild, and they were the Guild of Pepperers. The Guild of Pepperers started, we know it's before 1180 because there's a roll with the Guild of Pepperers on it in 1180. We don't know when it actually started before then. And the Pepperers joined up with the Spicers not long after that. What was the difference between Pepperers and Spicers? Well, Pepperers largely were concerned with wholesale, the Spicers with retail. But the Guild of Pepperers and Spicers also included a number of individuals who prepared spices, herbs, and other materia for treating the sick, and they were known as apothecaries. But they were definitely a separate subgroup within this guild. Well, some of these pepperers and spices would sell their wares en gros, that is, in large quantities, and they became the Guild of Grocers. And the Guild of Grocers, we know when they were founded. They were founded in 1376. And by 1428, they had become a company, a livery company of the City of London, and they received their royal charter in that year. But still within that group, there was a separate band of people who were apothecaries, and they called themselves grocer apothecaries. And they felt that they were different. They were not dealers in herbs and spices and indeed vegetables or anything else that the grocers were selling. They were there to prepare materia in order to treat the sick. And for a long time, they petitioned to secede from the grocers. The grocers didn't want this at all because the apothecaries represented about 25% of their company. It took a long time. But eventually, this man led us to independence. Gideon de Laune is an interesting man. He was a French Huguenot refugee. And in today's environment, it's quite interesting to think what a refugee achieved then. He and his father came over to escape political persecution in France, came over to England, and he set up as an apothecary, and he did extremely well. He mainly did well because he sold something called Delon's pills. Delon's pills were cures for all sorts of things, from jaundice, fever, cramps, and even venereal disease. They must have been really useful, and I'm sorry we don't have them now. Anyhow, he was an important man in many ways, not just because he was wealthy, but he also had important clients, including this lady, Princess Anne of Denmark. Now, Princess Anne of Denmark came over in 1590 to marry King James VI of Scotland. And then King James VI of Scotland assumed the English throne in 1603 and became King James I of England. And so she was queen. She was actually a rather flighty lady. She enjoyed good parties and spent an awful lot of her husband's money, didn't endear herself to him very much. There he is. This is a rather fine portrait we have in the hall of the king, looking a little bit, I think, the worse for wear. I think he probably had too many of Gideon de Leun's tinctures. Anyhow, he was persuaded by Gideon de Leun that the apothecaries did indeed need to be a separate entity from the grocers. And so it was on the 6th of December 1617 that the Society of Apothecaries received its royal charter and became an independent body. And here is our charter, which we have in the hall, signed by Clarence King of Arms, saying that we are a separate society. We weren't at all popular at that time. We weren't popular with the grocers, we weren't popular with the City of London, we certainly weren't popular with the College of Physicians. And later, King James had to defend his decision. And he said that he'd made this decision because the grocers are but merchants. The mystery, which means the craft, the mystery of these apothecaries were belonging to apothecaries, wherein the grocers are unskillful. And therefore, I think it is fitting they should be a corporation of themselves. And indeed, he made sure that we were called a society rather than a company. We are the only livery company of the City of London, only livery group of the City of London, and there are 110 of them now, to call ourselves a society, to distinguish ourselves from the mere merchants. So, what happened after that? Well, within 6 days, we received our grant of arms. And here are the arms. Here is the grant of arms. And you will notice, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. You'll notice on top we have a rhinoceros. Why do we have a rhinoceros? Well, we don't know why we had a rhinoceros. It was probably because it was some kind of wonderful, romantic foreign animal, a bit like a sort of living unicorn. Nobody had seen a rhinoceros. Some people think it may be because the rhinoceros, people thought the rhinoceros horn had some medicinal property. We know, of course, that is untrue. But in those days, we don't really know whether that was the reason why they chose rhinoceros. Anyhow, they didn't know what a rhinoceros looked like. So they took the best image that they had, which was this woodcut by Alfred Dürer. And there is his monogram. And he didn't know what rhinoceroses looked like either, but he'd heard a lot about them, and he knew they had rather sort of armor-plated skin. So he put this armor on the rhinoceros, and all the feet are all wrong, and the head's all wrong. But particularly, he knew that they had 2 horns, but he didn't know where to put the second horn. So he put it on its back, just there. So that is Dürer's rhino, and it's our rhino. And so there is our rhino with the second horn on its back. And you'll find actually in Apothecaries Hall there are rhinos everywhere. And I've even got the Apothecaries tie on today. It's full of rhinos with these little horns on the back. So that's our rhino. The coat of arms also has 2 unicorns, as supporters. And then the escutcheon is in the apothecaries, tinctures of azure, blue, and gold ore. And it depicts Apollo, the god of healing, slaying the wyvern or serpent or the dragon of disease. And down below we have our motto, which comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses, Daphnis and Apollo, and it's Opiferqui per orbem dicor. And loosely translated, it is and qui. It is spoken, dicor, throughout the world that I am the bringer of help. So what was the role of a livery company in the 17th century, such as the apothecaries? Well, it was the maintenance of standards that was particularly important, making sure that the quality of the product, in this case, medicaments and other things that an apothecary would give to the sick, were of high standard, so that the ingredients were and that the products were of high standard. The training of apprentices, and the support of its members. These were Christian confraternities. They all had a local church and a patron saint. Ours is, of course, St. Luke. We have a church just very close to Apothecaries Hall, which is our local church. And these organizations would support their members in bad times. So, for instance, if an apothecary fell on hard times, or there was an apothecary's widow, the society would support those people. And it was a place to meet and exchange ideas and to have social contact, networking, if you like, in modern language. So here is a medieval apothecary, well, actually a 17th century apothecary, and of course one wouldn't know what he was preparing and what were his ingredients and what the result of his preparations were. So it was important to have an organization that ensured quality. And then came this, the Great Plague of 1665, an appalling catalogue of disaster and death in London, one of many plagues that have hit the city over the years. The physicians, realizing that this was a contagious condition, fled. The apothecaries did not. The apothecaries felt it was their duty to stay behind and to treat the sick, and many of them lost their lives doing so. But we're rather proud of the fact that the apothecaries had the dignity and the duty to stay behind. Not long after that, the apothecaries acquired a piece of land further up the river, which became known as Apothecaries Garden. This is now called the Chelsea Physic Garden. Apothecaries Garden was originally a piece of market garden, which was then given a very long lease on a peppercorn rent by John Sloane to the apothecaries. And it was here that they grew many of the plants that were used in their medicaments, and where, importantly, they trained apprentices. This, it was on the river, and the apothecaries would sail up in their barge. Sadly, we don't have the barge anymore, to a barge house, which was just to the left of the picture here. There's now an embankment and a big, busy road beyond this gate. This is the garden as it is now. There's John Sloane, and it still grows many fine examples of apothecaries' plants. So in the 18th century, apothecaries continued to have their shops in and around London, and these are the kinds of things that they might have used as ingredients to their various preparations. This is in one of our historical collections. And in the 18th century, the apothecaries became quite prosperous. We developed a monopoly on providing medicaments and apothecaries' boxes to the army, the navy, the East India Company, and a number of other national organizations. In the 19th century, an apothecary's shop might have looked like this, but we were still inspecting these and regulating the trade. We would also supply apothecaries' boxes for home use. This is a nice 19th century, early 19th century apothecaries' box that you might have had as your medicine chest at home. There was a laboratory actually at Apothecaries Hall, and this is a giant form of pestle and mortar where drugs were prepared for sale in the apothecary's shop. And this was the shop actually at Apothecaries Hall. Sadly, this had to close in 1926 because of competition from the much larger groups that were then arising, such as Timothy White's and Boots. But it wasn't all just apothecarying. A very important point in our history was this, the Rose case. An apothecary called William Rose had the audacity to start not only preparing medicaments, but actually prescribing them for his patients. And he was taken to court by the College of Physicians, who didn't like this. They felt that this was their territory. And there was a huge battle, which in Parliament we eventually won by one vote. And so the apothecaries then were allowed to treat patients. And this was really the beginning of what we now recognize as the family practitioner or general practitioner in Britain. Another important moment in our history was the Apothecaries Act of 1815. This was an act passed in Parliament which basically established the Society of Apothecaries as a regulatory body and a licensing body for medicine. It was essentially the forerunner of our General Medical Council. And for about 50 years, apothecaries licensed medical practitioners. We also developed our own medical license itself, the LMA, the Licentiate of Medicine of Apothecaries, Society of Apothecaries, later the LMSSA, License in Medicine and Surgery of the Society of Apothecaries. And you could qualify as a doctor through us until 2003, so quite recently. The General Medical Council was only founded in the 1850s, so we were the medical licensing body really for most of the first half of the 19th century. Okay, so that's just a very brief rundown of our history. Just to mention a few people who have been prominent over the years. Perhaps our most famous alumnus is John Keats, the poet, who started off life as an apothecary, and he became a licentiate in 1816. Tragically, as you know, he died at the age of 26 in Rome. He gave up being an apothecary when he realized that he really wanted to be a poet. I think he didn't really like all the blood and gore, but he was actually quite good. And this is his certificate, and you'll see that he attended 2 courses in anatomy and physiology, 2 on theory and practice of medicine, 2 in chemistry, and 1 in materia medica. And he spent 6 months training at Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital. We are proud that we licensed the first woman doctor in the UK. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson became a licentiate in 1865. It was quite tricky for her coming to the lectures as the only woman, but she managed it. Obviously she is the role model for so many women who followed on from her. And there is her certificate confirming that she passed. Another notable alumnus was Sir Ronald Ross. He was a remarkable man. You probably all know his great achievement, which was to demonstrate that malaria was communicated through mosquitoes, and he won the Nobel Prize for that. And then I wonder how many of you recognize this lady. Absolutely right. Yes. So Agatha Christie, before she became famous for her crime novels, they qualified as an apothecary's assistant. And of course, as many of you will know, in her writings, many nefarious deeds are committed through potions and poisons and other things that might have found their way into an apothecary's shop. So now, just going back to the sort of historical side of things, let me take you on a little tour of our hall. First of all, let's look at where the hall is situated in London. So, medieval London finished on the west with one of the most grand buildings, a grand set of buildings actually in the country. And this was the monastery, the Blackfriars Monastery, the Dominican friary here. So in modern day, Ludgate Hill is there, Fleet Street is here, St. Paul's Cathedral, as it were, is off to your right, and the river is here flowing down to the bottom of the screen. So this was the monastery. And it was connected to St. Bridewell Palace here by a bridge. Now, the area that we're talking about is actually just here, and it's the guest house of the monastery. And in the guest house of the monastery, this is it, this is a picture of it, Catherine of Aragon, she went across that bridge to be interviewed by the papal emissaries when Henry VIII was trying to divorce her. So it was in that very room that this took place, and I will show you the room in a moment. So we just focus back on this. When the monasteries were dissolved by Henry VIII in the 16th century, these buildings were sold, broken up, some of them were taken down, and the guest house became a theatre, the Blackfriars Theatre, and in fact the old theatre is on the exact footprint of our present hall, and it's just there in the middle. Well, we bought that building not long after we were founded, and we were very happy there for a while. But as we know, there was the Great Plague, and then there was the Great Fire, which burnt everything in its wake. And in fact, it got just about as far as us and burnt us down. It didn't go much further, sadly. I say sadly, I wish it had stopped a bit earlier than that. Anyhow, so we were burnt down. But perhaps partly because of the Great Plague, the apothecaries weren't completely short of cash, and they all dipped their hands in their own pockets to build our present hall. And we were built very quickly, and our present hall dates from 1672. We are the oldest livery hall in the City of London. This is actually an 18th century entrance. And you go through here, and you go past these panels, which contain the lists of candidates who have passed our diplomas in the last few months. Anyway, you go through there, and in the 18th century, you would have gone through into this courtyard, which was a working courtyard for the apothecaries, with the laboratory underneath here, and all our wares stored in the colonnade. This is what it looks like now. Actually, we've had it even repainted since then. The frames to the windows are now in blue. So if you step inside, you come into the old 17th century interior. And here is the staircase. And you go up the staircase to the top with various portraits and stained glass around. And we have three main reception rooms in the hall. This is the parlor. You're actually only seeing part of the room here, but in it we have quite a lot of our artifacts, including many fine apothecaries' jars through the centuries. And then the next door room is called the courtroom, and this has the original 17th century paneling. It's taken with a wide-angle lens, so it doesn't look quite as broad as this in real life. There is that little picture that I showed you of Catherine of Aragon being interviewed by the papal papal emissaries. There's Gideon de Loan. And here is the hall itself. It's a classic double cube, and it's used for receptions, for dinners, for meetings. Here is a lecture being given in the hall, and here it is set for a dinner. And over everything presides this gentleman there, Gideon de Loan, who sees that we behave ourselves. And the windows are full of the coats of arms of past masters. So my coat of arms will eventually appear there when I get around to having it made. So just a little bit about what we do today, and then I'll finish. So what are we? We are an organization that consists of a master and 2 wardens. That's in our charter. We have a court of assistants, up to 24 members. We have about 1,200 liverymen, so that's members of the organization, and we are 85% medical. Most of the remaining 15% are pharmaceutical. You start off by becoming a yeoman, and you're a yeoman for up to 4 years before you become a liveryman. We also train apprentices. That's really more nowadays a form of mentoring, but it's a very useful form of mentoring. We're hoping to increase this number. But then we have members of faculties and archives. I'll talk about the faculties in a moment. We have a member of one of our faculties sitting here, Dr. Paul Darragh, who is a member of the Faculty of Conflict and Catastrophe Medicine. We have friends of our archives, and we have a large number of examiners who examine in our diplomas. So what do we do nowadays? Well, there are 4 main things. We have a very important academic strand, and actually that distinguishes us from other livery companies. We have an important focus on education and examinations. Charitable, our City of London focus, and social. And I'll just briefly talk about all of those. So we have 2 faculties. One is the Faculty of the History and Philosophy of Medicine and Pharmacy. And this runs courses in history of medicine, history of pharmacy, and the philosophy of both of those, both long and short courses. These are taken by doctors, by historians, by pharmacists, by members of the general public, and anybody who's interested. And they can take exams in those at the end. We also have an important faculty of the conflict and catastrophe medicine. This deals with conflicts, as sort of armed forces, and other forms of conflict, both civilian and military, and catastrophes such as natural disasters, earthquakes, landslides, and so on. And there is training for individuals in how to deal with all of these. This course is immensely popular. It's taken by members of our armed forces and armed forces from other countries, and people come in internationally to take it. These are our diplomas. We have diplomas in a number of areas: history of medicine, philosophy of medicine, the medical jurisprudence, forensic medical sciences. These last 3 are particularly important. Our diploma in genitourinary medicine, our diploma in HIV medicine are both diplomas that are compulsory for doctors in those specialties. So if you are a registrar and want to become a consultant in either of those specialties, you have to take our diploma. And our diploma in conflict and catastrophe medicine is taken internationally. And this is our hall set up for an OSCE. A carousel that candidates go round. So our hall has multiple uses. We also have a large number of lectures across a wide range of subjects, both historical and medical. We award various prizes. These are anything from prizes to medical students, support for electives, right through to prizes for senior researchers. Our most prominent one is the Galen Medal, which is given to an outstanding researcher, and it's our sort of little mini Nobel Prize. We have a fantastic archive, a really important archive of medicine and pharmacy and apothecaries, and a large number of artifacts, such as apothecaries' jars, pill tiles, and so on. Like all livery companies, we have a very important charitable focus, and we regard this as a central part of what we do. And I know that that chimes in very much with the Company of Apothecaries Hall here. We are a relatively small charity, but so we focus on medical things, mainly medical students. We also support units in our armed forces, including a field hospital. We have other charitable endeavors. We support a number of schools, particularly with prizes in relation to medicine or scientific subjects. And recently we've been involved with rhino conservation. Because the rhinoceros has been so important in our history and we've got so much from the rhino, now it's so endangered, we want to give something back. And so we're supporting Save the Rhino and their work in Africa in supporting this magnificent and very endangered creature. We have an important role, like all livery companies, in supporting the Lord Mayor and the sheriffs and the City of London generally, and its support for what goes on there. And then there is the social aspect. That is possibly a lesser aspect, but it's a very important one. We are a place, and luckily we have our own hall. It survived the Blitz. Miraculously, there was a bomb that went down one of our chimneys but failed to go off. And there were brave people on the rooftop throwing off incendiaries, and that's why our hall still survives. So we do have a hall where people can meet, they can exchange ideas, they can network if you like, and we have a large number of dinners and various external events. We have a livery committee which organizes trips and tours. So here we are meeting before a dinner in the courtroom, and there are various people enjoying a nice dinner. So we have a number of active functions today, but we never forget our historical roots. We are a 400-year-old organization. We celebrated our 400th anniversary last year. We had a lot of fun and games doing that. We maintain many of the old traditions of the society. Here is the Court of Assistants wearing their gowns of azure and ore, blue and gold. And in fact, we're walking to St. Paul's Cathedral for an evensong to celebrate our 400th anniversary. We are being led by the beadle wearing his beadle's gown, and most of you will know what the tassels are. In medieval times, the beadle would dip his tassels into rose-scented water so that as he walked through the streets, the members of the court would be protected from the nasty, horrible smells by wafts of beautiful perfume. And I like to think that that still happens today. But we also don't forget our origin ultimately as apothecaries and our importance in providing medicaments for all society, including the poor. And we think that that is very important. And we look back on our history with great pride. So thank you. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for asking me and inviting me to come here.